Hello, and welcome to Neocacania. This is a city I made in City Skylines to test out this block design here. As you can see, this is an industrial district with a lot of heavy traffic, but everything's still flowing just fine. And up here we have a commercial district, also working just fine. Here is the central metro station. You can see I have these walkways around it, and that really increases your pedestrian traffic. Pedestrians like walkways a lot better than sidewalks, and they especially like bridges better than crosswalks, so they'll walk quite a bit further. This is version 2 of my block design. Here is version 1. The problem with this was traffic coming in this way that wanted to get over here would go through here, and then this distance here was too short for traffic to merge through, traffic going along this main one-way. So I just moved those in a little bit, and if you're wondering, how do I make a crosswalk? Like right here, how do I make a crosswalk across this street? Well, if you go to the upgrade tool and you switch between decorated and undecorated streets, where they meet each other, you'll see there's a crosswalk. And there you go. And these walkways here aren't just wasted space, because I didn't want to zone along these central roads anyway, because sometimes vehicles will stop at buildings, and I wanted to make sure they went into the side road first, basically, before they stopped at a building. So that's part of why I put those walkways there. But, you know, it's worthwhile to have the walkways anyway, just because there's so much metro traffic that I get. It varies quite a bit. I've actually seen it get over 2,000 at times. See, 831? It's kind of low. Well, alright. You can see I have these two streets, these two connector streets, merging into a 6-lane two-way. And the reason why I do that is so that along these main streets, there will only be one traffic light. If I had two roads coming from each of these two blocks going straight across, there would be two traffic lights, and the distance between the traffic lights would also be really short. It's okay to have multiple traffic lights, but you need to have at least about this much distance if you don't want to impede traffic flow. As you can see, the main streets here are a grid of pairs of 6-lane one-ways. And this is a really good system for your main streets, I think. If you just have, if you have 6-lane two-ways, then vehicles making left turns will interfere with traffic. All the traffic lights in City Skylines are two-phase, or rather, you don't have separate left turn phases. But even if you did, you'd still be adding extra time where people are only making left turns, and you'd be decreasing the average flow rate through the intersection, and that's really what's most important. There is some tendency for people to use the same lane, and the reason for that is because your citizens plan out their route ahead of time, and their route says, let's merge into this lane at this point along the road. So if you have a lot of people following the same path, they'll want to, or rather, if you have a lot of people going from one place to another place and they have the same starting point and destination, they'll follow the same path. And, well, it would be very difficult to make them account for traffic. It becomes a much more complicated calculation. And all things considered, the traffic simulation is really good in my opinion. Generally speaking, if you have really long lines of just cars in one lane, then you have an issue somewhere else. What you can do is add a bypass if you have space. Now if I go to my industrial district, here I have this, where is it? Here we go. Train station, cargo train terminal. There's a lot of traffic coming off here. So what I did was I added this bypass. Goes here. And I made this section here freeway. This and the highway off-ramp. I should pick a term, highway or freeway. What's it called here? Highways, okay. The highway and the highway off-ramp merge into the 6-lane one-way with no traffic light. And if I had this section here, a 6-lane, then there would be a traffic light here, which is, it's a little bit silly, but you know, I think it's a good traffic system overall, and the challenges are interesting. Here is the highway interchange. This is a design I made. I call it a paperclip interchange. It's a bit cheaper than the Clover interchange, and there's no weaving, and it's fairly small. Would it work in real life? Well, the issue would probably be one highway, this highway here, has the left exit on the left side. And this highway has the left exit on the right side. So there's a difference. It might be confusing. At least in America, people try and make all of the interchange exits on the right side. First off, just to be standardized, and second off, a lot of places have HOV lanes or toll lanes, and if you have exits on the left, it's a problem with those. But personally, I think those special lanes are kind of a dumb idea anyway, so whatever. I think left exits are perfectly fine in real life if you are clear about it with the signs and so on. You might be wondering, why do I have so much money? Why am I making so much money? Well, hold on a second. Let's raise high density commercial taxes to 13 and residential to 10. Now then, you might be wondering, why am I making so much money? And the reason for that is largely because of this policy right here, Big Business Benefactor. It says high density commercial buildings double their sales, and that means twice the tax income. But it's not just free money, there is a downside. And the downside is that your commercial buildings will demand twice the amount of goods. You can see here, here's a donut van. It's delivering goods to a shopping mall. I thought I'd explain a bit about the economic system of City Skylines because it's not really explained that well in-game. But I think it's a good design. These goods are made by general industry. Over here, general industry, it makes goods that go to commercial buildings. General industry takes processed raw materials. Here's Refined Oil Company. It makes processed oil, and it requires raw oil. The raw materials are made by specialized industry buildings that only appear when you make specialized industry on the natural resource. Here's Woody's Wood. It produces raw wood, and that's because I have this forestry industry district placed on some forestry natural resource. A lot of people have had trouble with not having any commercial demand, basically. And the reason for that is probably because they're not producing any goods, and instead they're importing too many goods. And that'll basically mean you have no commercial demand. I don't really have any commercial demand at the moment either, but that is because I have some commercial buildings being constructed. I have zone commercial, and eventually it'll probably go back up. Now, you can see here, this is the imports and exports info thing. I'm importing raw forestry products, You know that because I'm exporting forestry products, so I must be importing the raw ones. And you don't want to import raw materials and then export the processed materials. Exporting goods is fine, but you should try and process the materials here. So what I could do is find a forestry area that's processing wood but not producing raw wood, and I could dezone this, replace it with offices, and then that should help balance out my imports and exports, which generally makes everything work better. And another thing I could do is find an area with forestry natural resource, a lot of forestry, and here's a industry district, and I could either zone more industry here, or I could go to the policies page and I can put in industrial space planning, which doubles the goods production. Now you really want to watch out for noise pollution. It is a significant issue. Is this residential? It is residential, so I'll just dezone that, place it with offices there. Problem solved. Yep, noise pollution really is a significant factor for residential buildings. Yeah, so this should help balance out my imports and exports. Another problem some people have is industrial buildings with not enough workers. You can see this here is a level 1 building, so it wants uneducated workers, but it's not really a problem if you have overeducated workers. Here I have a forestry building with highly educated workers. The issue is that educated workers will prefer to work in buildings that require, well, they prefer to work in jobs that require their education. So if you have offices that require highly educated workers, or just well educated, then your educated workers will work here instead. And you'll get full offices with more workers than they actually need, and no workers at some of your industry buildings. Well, I guess that's kind of an interesting social commentary right there, huh? Maybe arguably the same thing is happening in America right now, where everybody's going to college and so they don't want to work in industry, even if it might pay as well or better than an office job or a commercial job. But, well, let's not even get into that, eh? This is kind of an interesting idea. In city builders, progress sort of means taller and taller buildings, bigger buildings. Well, personally I think New York, for example, is a bit over-romanticized just because so many TV shows are made there. One thing a lot of people don't realize is that these days the cost of per square foot of construction of a building is about flat between 5 and 20 stories. So this here, the cost per floor area is about the same. So the reason why you see so many 5-story buildings is largely down to zoning and city policies. So that's why people like Donald Trump, who make these huge buildings, can make so much money off of it. For example, in New York, the cost of an apartment, generally speaking, is a lot higher than even the construction cost of a new skyscraper, and much higher than the construction cost of a new 40-story building. And part of the construction cost is higher in New York too, partly because labor is expensive, but a lot of it is down to regulations and zoning. I remember talking to a property developer once, and I said something about precast concrete and construction methods, and he said, "See, you're thinking like an engineer. Property development is about management and dealing with permits and zoning and stuff." I was like, well, okay. Okay then, maybe it's not for me. And so you might ask, how would this work in real life? Well, I think this block design actually would be fairly good in real life. A lot of cities use a grid layout, a pure grid street layout, but it actually is a bad system, and I'm not being controversial here. City planners have basically realized this a few decades ago, several decades ago, to some extent. But most city streets are much older than that, so you see a lot of grids, but it's suboptimal. You can still get where you're going, but you end up with a lot of street area relative to buildings, and you also end up with a relatively high accident rate. As for this kind of system with the central subway stations, metro stations, well, metro stations and city skylines are a little bit cheaper than they are in real life. They're considerably cheaper than the above ground train stations, but a metro station is basically an underground train station, which is therefore more expensive. The newest subway stop, not a system, just a stop and some tunnels in New York City to go along with One World Trade Center, has cost $4 billion so far, which is higher than normal, but still we're talking about billions and billions of dollars, which I think would be millions of dollars in city skylines terms. I think it's about 1,000 to 1. So a lot of cities have said, well, in that case, we'll put in light rail. We'll have rail along the middle of streets. Here I have a rail system. This is cargo freight rail, of course. I don't know if it's actually worthwhile, but in terms of cost effectiveness. But I wanted a train system. These are really expensive. But it's not like money really matters that much. But I'm not a big fan of those light rail systems either, to be honest, because, well, why are you replacing buses with trains? Is it because buses are too small? That doesn't make sense, because buses are usually mostly empty. Is it because buses have rubber tires? Rubber tires aren't the problem. I mean, they work really well. Just your standard pneumatic rubber tire. It has a much higher traction than the steel wheels that trains use. Now, you can use overhead electric lines for trains, but you can do that with buses too. They're called trolley buses. That's probably my favorite kind of public transit. They do exist in several places, and they work fairly well. Yeah. As far as what I think the future of transportation will be, I mean, probably just cars, in my opinion. We might see more ride sharing, I think, with things like Lyft and Uber. Maybe even more sort of distributed than that. But, yeah, we might see self-driving cars, at least on highways. That's entirely possible. We might see more electric cars. So, am I a big investor in Tesla then? Well, not exactly. I shorted them a while back, fairly recently actually, and made a bit of money off that. But I'm not just saying cars are probably the future because of my idea for a new battery chemistry. Ho ho ho. It's not like I can do much with that anyway. Another difference between city skylines and real life is the kind of electrical power generation that people generally use. The coal plant maintenance cost gets to be really expensive, so starting out, people use wind power. Here you have your standard 3-blade, forward-facing, horizontal axis wind turbine with fiberglass composite blades. The reason why these face into the wind is because if you have the blades passing behind this tower here, then you get changes in the force on the blades every time they pass behind the tower, because the wind changes. It's affected by the tower. And that causes the blades to wear out. That's also one of the main reasons why people use those instead of this kind of vertical axis wind turbine. You know, they're called advanced wind turbines. I'm not complaining about this. It's fine to have something that looks different, and you know, they want the advanced wind turbine to look different. But it's not, in real life, it's not like a more advanced, more sophisticated design. And also, a lot of people focus too much on the way something looks. Like they say, here's a wind turbine. What if we make it look different? But that's not the issue. The issue is what goes on in the factory and what goes on inside of it. Like, what about the gearbox, the electric motor, the power conversion? That stuff can cost more than the blades, for sure. My power mostly comes from these solar power plants. These are power tower type solar thermal power plants. These little mirrors all reflect sunlight onto these collectors at the top of the tower, and that heats up a liquid. The liquid is used to drive some turbines that produce power in this building here. And one nice thing about these is it's entirely feasible to store a tank of hot liquid. Probably one of these is hot and one of these is cold, and this allows for power production during the night. That's one thing you can do with that. Wind is cheaper. Wind is quite cost effective in terms of cost per average power, but it's unreliable. A while back, I believe in 2008, there was a guy called Pickens. He ran ads promoting a Pickens plan because he had invested in wind and natural gas power, and he thought he'd promote both of them at the same time. He said, well, let's build more wind turbines, and then we'll use that to replace natural gas power production, and we'll use that natural gas to power trucks. Well, wind turbines are fine. Using compressed natural gas to power cars is fine. That's actually quite common in some parts of the world. However, because wind power is unreliable, people generally use it in combination with either hydro or natural gas power, because those can be adjusted easily to compensate for the variations in wind speed. Another issue is that it's easier to convert a gas engine to natural gas than it is to convert a diesel engine, and most heavy trucks use diesel engines. So it wasn't really a great plan, but the media was really positive on it. But, you know, news media it's never been really that great with engineering, so that's just how it is. There's less interest actually in these power tower solar thermal plants than there used to be. They tried making a couple. They're fairly expensive, but I think it's possible to make them for less than they have. But the main reason is because the price of solar panels has come down, so you see more of these rooftop solar panels. But the reason for that is because, first, rooftop solar panels are subsidized in many places, and second, the panel production is heavily subsidized in China, because the Chinese government said, hey, maybe solar power is the future, let's subsidize it, get a head start, and then we'll be the leaders in the future. Well, it doesn't really work like that. Without those subsidies, it doesn't really make sense to do that, because First off, the installation cost is significant. Second off, it's worth having tilting solar panels that track the sun a little bit. It is more efficient than just having fixed solar panels. But, you know, that's just how it is. You have to watch out for those government subsidies, those Chinese subsidies. A while back, I bought some stock in a shipping company that owned a bunch of container ships, and I thought, well, their ships seem to be worth more than their stock, and they have physical assets. It's not like a .com with nothing material. So it seemed like a reasonable investment, and then, of course, the stock price crashed. And that was because the price of shipping materials crashed, and that was because the cost of new ships crashed. Basically down to the cost of steel scrap. And the reason for that, well, I looked into it, and ship makers were doing just fine, despite the dropping ship prices. So it turned out that South Korea and China were heavily subsidizing shipbuilders. And of course this isn't public or anything, I had to look into it a little bit. But that's what they were doing, and that's what caused that. Well, you just have to watch out for governments, I guess. There's also a fusion power plant, of course, one of the monuments. Well, you know, people are working on it, but don't get your hopes up. If you want to read 200 pages about why, I definitely recommend Todd Ryder's thesis paper, Fundamental Limitations on Plasma Fusion Systems Not in Thermodynamic Equilibrium. Before Todd was so discouraged, he changed fields from in biology, now he's a medical researcher. He's done okay though. Other differences between city skylines and real life? Well, if I take a 2-lane street off of a 6-lane street, 6-lane one-way here, there is now a traffic light. This would not be a traffic light in real life. Yep. And also, if I have a street, I can't zone around the end. In real life, you often see a little cul-de-sac at the end of a street with a bunch of houses around it, but we can't do that in city skylines. It does make dead ends a little bit less attractive, but at the same time, cars, I believe, will only turn around if they don't go into a building at the end of one of these streets. So for example, if you have a fire truck, I believe it'll only turn around at the end of the street. I'm not entirely sure, but I think it only will. I think that's about everything I wanted to talk about. So, thanks for watching, and maybe I'll see you next time.